But I do want to start out with this about Attica because I think that for any of us of a certain generation, Attica was really a very important turning point in a lot of our political lives. It was for me at age 19 when I was a sophomore at Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, because I was brought into the struggle because of the prison uprisings. I had been communicating with actually one of the Soledad brothers before George Jackson was killed. That was John Clouchet. But other prisoners too, because, you know, it was things I read in the Black Panther newspaper, not that it was a Black Panther Party chapter in Hampton Roads. You know, that's Hampton and Newport News and Portsmouth. But there was a very revolutionary bookstore in Newport News that sold the Black Panther newspaper. And so I would go there on the weekends, you know, to help get the paper out and so forth. I hadn't met the party at that time, and that was around 68, 69. But when Attica hit, I remember watching it. It was, even though there wasn't social media 45 years ago, Attica was a national event. It was on TV live. It was live on TV.
Scary.
And every night, you know, when I wasn't in class, some of the students and I, we would sit around the TV to watch these events unfold. And as I was saying, they actually showed the National Guard mowing down these prisoners. It was just horrifying. You know, you saw the smoke and, you know, and again, it was sort of very similar to what happened to Jonathan Jackson, because who knew? You know, if you don't understand the role, fully understand, because I think Jonathan or George definitely understood the role of the state. I mean, they were, they lived it every day. But the fact that I think there was this feeling that, okay, if we take a judge hostage, you know, they're not going to kill him. You know, this is one of their, representatives, the judge. But, and the same with the hostages that the Attica brothers took. They took 9 to 10 guards hostage. And this is what kept them alive for 4 days during these negotiations. Because I'm sure the state was worried about, they're always worried about their image to a certain point. You know, how is this going to look if we're going to, you know, we want to slaughter, you know, poor and working people. They're expendable. They're expendable. But, you know, how's this going to look to the rest of the world if we're going to shoot down some of our own? But, you know, the decree came down from Rockefeller. Okay, they're expendable too, as long as we, you know, kill these revolutionaries, because we don't want this spreading. We don't want this prison rebellion spreading to other prisons, because that's what they were afraid of.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they were afraid of, because they knew that the prisons were ripe for this type of rebellion inside the walls. So they had to make Attica an example. You know, they had to say, you know, and that's what they did. They had the prisoners, the ones after they slaughtered the prisoners and the hostages, you would see if you look at the books, I forgot, was it Tom Wicker that did a book?
Yes.
Tom Wicker from the New York Times, who was also part of the negotiating team. He did a book, and you could see pictures, but you could go on Google and see the pictures of naked prisoners walking through the yards on their hands and knees, crawling. They made them crawl. Yeah, right. If you put the faces to the butts of the prison, it was a humiliating thing that they wanted to do to the prisoners.
LT was alive.
Was he?
Killed him afterwards.
Oh, they did.
Was alive.
Okay.
John,
Oh, look at that. There it is. After Attica, look at this. These are the slaughtered prisoners right here. So, anyway, so they had to make an example of the Attica prisoners. But as you know, Steve was saying, look at that yard. That's the rebellion right there. That's the rebellion. These brave prisoners who felt that they had nothing to lose at all, but everything to gain. And so, you know, their spirit lives on. And as Stephen was saying in terms of L.D. Barclay, who was one of the most well-known of the leaders, he said, this is just the sound before the fury. You know, and that's so true. So anyway, I just wanted to raise that. That always stuck with me. And then a year later, 1972, is when I met the Prisoner Solidarity Committee. Because, you know, there were still rebellions going on in other prisons, like in Richmond, Virginia, which is very near where I went to school. And so I started communicating with the Prisoner Solidarity Committee, and then that's when I met the party, through the Prisoner Solidarity Committee, which was formed in 1970, coming out of the Auburn Prison Rebellion. That's when the Prison Solidarity Committee was formed, because these prisoners were rebelling in Auburn, and so the party said, you know, the party felt, well, these prisoners need support. And, you know, and it's better that if we put it in the name of a mass organization. Here are these, okay.
Just go back.
Go back one. See, these are the prisoners, look at that.
Wow.
This is what they did to them. So anyway, our party has always sacrificed the building of our own organization in order to support the most oppressed. You know, what do oppressed, you know, movements and workers need from us? They need our solidarity, concrete solidarity. You know, we had demonstrations. We would go to anti-war demonstrations at the time, because that was the largest mass movement in the country at that time against the Vietnam War. And the leadership was petty bourgeois and so forth. But we felt it needed a left-wing pole within the anti-war movement, and we were the left-wing pole. We're the ones who said that not only should the troops come home, but we should say, you know, victory to the National Liberation Front of Vietnam. You know, this is the National Liberation Movement that was leading, Ho Chi Minh leading the struggle against U.S. imperialism that has destroyed their country after the French destroyed it in 1956, but they drove the French out. And then that's when the U.S. intervened in Vietnam. So we very much distinguish ourselves in terms of the anti-war movement at that time, but we also said, stop the war against Black America. We brought that slogan into the anti-war movement, because if you're going to fight, you know, imperialism on one front, you got to fight it at home too. And that is the struggle against racism and national oppression. So to us, it was two sides of the same coin in terms of fighting imperialism and capitalism. So we've always been, to answer your question, we've always been for socialist unity. We've always been for uniting with others. Whether we agree on every question or not, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is finding common ground to fight, you know, to defeat imperialism and capitalism, because the ruling class is united when it comes to working and the poor people. They're always united, even though they try to outcompete each other and so forth for profits and for markets and so forth. But when it comes to workers and oppressed people fighting back, they have no problem uniting against us. And so we have to help raise consciousness within our class that this is what we need. It's more of us than it is them, you know. And as Steve was saying, you know, it is a battle of ideas. The biggest weapon that the ruling class has, it's not, you know, the military or the militarization of the police. I mean, that's formidable. But it's the battle of ideas, because just take this in consideration. When the Ferguson Rebellion broke out in 2014 after the murder of Michael Brown, what did the ruling class do? They sent in tanks. You know, you would think that Ferguson was like Vietnam or Iraq. I mean, it was like, It looked like a war zone. And this was against U.S. citizens, young black youth who were saying, we want justice for Michael Brown. Hands up, don't shoot. But what did they do? They tried to demonize these youth in the eyes of the rest of the country and the world. So this is why they brought in the tanks and the military and the rubber bullets and the tear gas and so forth. And these youth, they just wanted justice. They wanted justice. They wanted to show that black lives do matter, our lives do matter. And when I was in Ferguson after the rebellion, I was interviewing some of these youth, and I said, well, what are you, we were in the streets, we were marching till like 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning, you're running to try to catch up with these young people, marching to the police station. And I asked one of them, I said, well, what do you want to see come out of this? You know what he said? He said, I want a job. All I want is a job. I want to be part of a union. I have it on tape. He said, I don't want to be targeted by the police. I want a job, because I have to feed my family like everybody else. Another young man that I spoke to, this is when we went to the memorial. We went to the spot where Michael Brown was killed. And so I asked another youth, I said, well, why are you here? What do you want to see happen? And he said the same thing. He said, I make $7 an hour. I can't, take care of my daughter, a $7, minimum wage. And he said, that's what I want. I want a job, I don't want to be targeted by the police. I know these youth, they know what's happening. They know what's happening to them. They know how they're being viewed by society, that they feel that they are expendable. And this is not just, black youth and brown youth and indigenous youth, but look at what's happening around the country, around the world. Look at Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. I have to raise this because it's facing a $72 billion debt. $72 billion debt. And that's why you see 3,000 Puerto Ricans a day are forced to leave that island. They're forced to leave their homeland because of the economic crisis. And a lot of them have gone to Florida, Orlando, where that massacre took place, at the Pulse just several months ago. A lot of them were Puerto Ricans.
Latin.
A lot of them were Puerto Rican, gay, and lesbian, trans people because of that forced migration. They're forced to leave their homeland. They're expendable. Mm-hmm. They're expendable just like black and brown youth are. We've been talking about the mass gentrification that's going on. We're facing it in New York City. It's an epidemic everywhere. In Brooklyn, which is like a black city, mainly immigrant, Caribbean community, people are being forced out of Brooklyn. And you have you have white and affluent people moving into Brooklyn, moving people out. It's horrifying. It's really, really horrifying for a place like Brooklyn, which is, has this tradition, in terms of culture and everything. So it's a mass epidemic. This capitalist globalization is a mass. It's a mass epidemic on a worldwide scale because workers are competing for fewer and fewer jobs. That's what the issue is. They're competing for fewer jobs because the capitalists are allowing technology to just wipe out so many jobs in the industrial, sector and of course the service sectors. But on the flip side, it's laying the basis for more and more unity because look at Occupy Wall Street back in 2011. Why did these youth target Wall Street? Because they saw themselves as part of it's not quite this way, this equation. We don't quite put it that way. It's not a Marxist, term, but it's the 99%. They say, well, it's the 99% versus the 1%. And the 1%, are the Wall Street corporations, who fund the private prisons and so forth. And so these youth, they wanted to fight back against capitalism because they saw no future for themselves in capitalism. The problem is that they didn't understand the centrality of the struggle against racism. That was their number one problem, and the fact that they didn't see the cops as part of this capitalist state until they were repressed and thrown out, and they destroyed the Occupy movement and so forth. But a lot of those young whites are now part of the Black Lives Matter movement. They understand that their future lies in showing solidarity with this movement in any way that they can to show that solidarity. And I do want to say, and I'll say something about, our election campaign that some of you all are asking about. First of all, we don't run in the elections, and we've been using the elections since 1980. We don't run in these elections as a revolutionary party because we feel that we can win these elections. And furthermore, we don't want to win these elections. That's the furthest thing from our mind. We know these elections are bogus. They don't change anything for the better for working and poor people. It is the lesser evil. You either vote for a Trump or Hillary Clinton, and they're both evil. It's just their rhetoric is different and so forth. However, we don't blame oppressed people feeling like their lives are being threatened by a Trump, especially if they're immigrants, especially if they're Muslims, if they're women, and this has been Trump's, he has demonized, especially these sectors of our class. And of course, he's not for Black Lives Matter either. Mm-hmm. But he has singled out immigrants, this apartheid wall that he claims he wants to build between Mexico and the U.S. And really, so much of the U.S. is part of Mexico. It was stolen. In 1848, the whole Southwest is part of Mexico, along with indigenous lands, too, that were also stolen. So we don't blame immigrants feeling like, we have to defeat Trump any way we can. So if they want to vote for Clinton, we understand that. It's the movement. It's the movement that we have to convince that this is not the answer. Voting for Clinton is not the answer to defeating Trump. The answer is independent revolutionary struggle and fight back. And this has been our main message. This is a very important reason why we are running in these elections, along with our 10-point program, which is, we feel, very, very important from a popular point of view. And we're running 2 Black candidates. And if you look at the first demand, it's to defend Black Lives Matter. It's also to demand reparations, for oppressed peoples who've had their labor stolen, their land stolen, and so forth. And that's why imperialism is the most, especially the United States, is the most powerful country in the world because of this stolen wealth for generations, going back to the days of slavery and Columbus and so forth. So, but the other reason why we run in these elections is to give an orientation to the movement. We feel beholden. We're part of the revolutionary movement in this country that is very weak as a whole when it comes to fighting against racism and national oppression. It's like, we're all in the same boat, so we all should just look at each other in the same way. But within our class, there's a lot of inequality. There's a lot of racism. There's a lot of sexism. There's LGBTQ oppression. There's discrimination against people with disabilities and so forth. So there's a lot of inequalities that's within our class. But we feel that, again, racism is the central issue. It connects all of the different issues, even within our class, and that's why we stress it so much. If we want to fight against gentrification, if we want to fight against the closings of hospitals, if we want to fight for, full funding of public education and so forth, all the things that we need, we have to find ways of uniting our class. And that is around the issue of fighting racism, because if oppressed people don't trust you, you know, you're not going to ever build any type of unity and solidarity. And that's why, and I'll end with this. This is why we feel so passionate about Black Lives Matter, because even though it's still a very young movement coming out of the Trayvon Martin killing in 2012. It started as a hashtag on Twitter, but it's evolved into this incredible uprising against police terror. But it's also evolving. It's impacting every movement, every social movement in this society. And I'll raise just a couple of examples of this. Just recently, last weekend, in Richmond, Virginia, I think all of you all know about the Fight for 15 in a union, that low-wage workers for a number of years have been fighting for a livable wage and to join a union. And it's been led mainly by Black and brown women who are single mothers. Not exclusively, but that's been the backbone of this movement. Well, the Black Lives Matter movement is having an impact on this struggle, because they met in Richmond, Virginia, and that was conscious because Richmond was one of the homes of the Confederacy, along with Montgomery, the pro-slavery capital. And they met in Richmond, Virginia, and in Richmond, they still have this Confederate row. They have rows and rows of statues in tribute to Confederate slave owners. Many of them were, you know, with Robert E. Lee, you know, fighting against the Union Army, which was fighting against slavery. It's, you know, in terms of the military aspect of it. And so they decided to have a conference. Thousands of them came out to talk about how the Black Lives Matter movement impacts the Fight for 15. And then after that, they had a march. You know, they had a march down Confederate Row. Yeah. This is the Fight for 15. You know? And it really it just shows that the Black Lives Matter movement, with all the demonization, with all of the, you know, the challenges that it's facing, especially after the killing of these police officers in Dallas and in, you know, where was the other? Oh, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, just last month, where the ruling class tried to say, well, you know, Black Lives Matter is, you know, they're the ones who were, you know, responsible for the killing of these police and so forth. And we know just the opposite of that, you know. Despite all of that, they are still, you know, continuing to, you know, as they say, shut shit down. You know, yeah, you know, they're shutting stuff down. They're having forums. They've now put out it's called a vision for Black Lives. It's the movement for Black Lives that put out a transitional program. It's like 6 different demands. And it's not just dealing with police terror, but they're dealing with gentrification. They're dealing with jobs. They're dealing with all kinds of issues that are facing, you know, Black and other oppressed people. It's a Palestine. They have an international scope to it, you know, vision to it. And I think even if we have any issues with it, we should support it. We should promote it, and we should support it. And that's what we plan. That's what we plan to do. And lastly, in terms of our campaign, we feel that there's nothing more important, and it's something we're seeing more and more in terms of Twitter and the social media, that we must call for the disarming of the police. We must call for the abolishment of the police as a repressive force. Yes. Mm-hmm. As a repressive force. And this gets to some of the issues that we've been dealing with in terms of the campaign, like the RNC and the DNC protest against Trump and protest against Clinton, that Lamont and I have both, you know, we have participated in. And I'm asked this question, well, what do you mean, you know, what about the police in Dallas and so forth? Don't you all have any, you know, sympathy for them and so forth. And the way I answer it, because that's a trap.
Yes, it is, yes.
That's a trap. They want you to, they, they want the conversation to go in terms of like, well, what about individual police? Don't you think there are good police and bad police and so forth? We don't get into that. What we say is that we don't look at the police as individuals. We look at them as a repressive force that exists above society. They're not arrested. They're not indicted when it comes to killing oppressed people, even if it's on videotape, like Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, 12-year-old, Tamir Rice in Cleveland, who was shot down, John Crawford in that Walmart, Freddie Gray. None of those cops, they all got off.
The list goes on.
And the list goes on and on because they are above society. The ruling class needs this repressive force to keep the status quo, to keep the profits coming into the coffers of the banks and so forth. So they need the police, they need the courts, they need the jails to keep, this tiny ruling class on top while oppressing the massive workers and oppressed class on the bottom. And so that's why we're calling for disarming the police as well as abolishing the police, because as the Black Panthers Party showed, the community, they can find ways of protecting the community without the role of the police. I mean, we hear all the time, well, what about black on black crime and so forth? And they never talk about white on white crime. They never, it's always black on black crime, and don't you need the police? And no, I said, in Oman, I say, no, what the community needs are jobs, and decent housing, and decent education. Then you'll see, if that happens, then you won't see people killing each other because they have no hope. There's nothing for them, So, it's internalizing their oppression and so forth. And if we're talking about empowering the black and brown communities, we have to find ways of empowering these communities in any way that they see fit. And that's what our role is in terms of a revolutionary party. So that's why we feel that there's nothing more important than defending Black Lives Matter, because they're on the front lines. They're on the front lines against police terror. And lastly, they are they really are, and it may change. It may next year may be something different. We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. But right now, they are an extension of the Black Panther Party. They're an extension of the struggle for black liberation, which will impact all of our struggles. You have Asians now, Asians for Black Lives Matter. You have Veterans for Peace coming out for Black Lives Matter. And we have to see more of this, not less. And so that's another message of our campaign. We have to continue to push this orientation that to isolate, to marginalize our movements, it weakens all of us. And if we want to see socialist unity and solidarity, this is what has to happen. And we're going to continue putting out that message. Yes.
Talk a little bit about that as well.
Yes. I'm so glad you raised that. Mm-hmm.
Oh, our new collective, the new Black Authors Collective. With Comrade Maddie. Yes.
Oh, right. No. But, yeah, as I say, our campaign is not about how many votes we can get, how many ballots we can get on. Although that's it's very important because people look at you differently if you're running for office. They take you more seriously if you're running for office. And so we can, we get that. But on the other hand, what we're stressing because of social media, because it's so easy now to get on Twitter and Facebook, that what we're finding is that our campaign has created a buzz on Twitter and on Facebook. And people are now saying, oh, there is an alternative? Oh, I didn't realize a black woman was running for president. I didn't realize. Why didn't I know about? Well, that's because CNN and other media, have, censored us, basically. So, okay, so what we do is we're doing a lot of write-in campaigns around the country. People can now, vote for us as a write-in candidate if they don't want to vote for Hillary Clinton. And also, we have online petitioning, too, where people can vote for us. And now prisoners, we're going to put in our newspaper, because a lot of prisoners, and this is another role of our newspaper, that we not only cover as much of many working class issues and struggles around the country and around the world, but we also promote the struggles of prisoners and so forth. Our prisoners get free subscriptions to Workers' World newspaper. Not one prisoner do we ask $1, 1 cent from a prisoner. It's always been free for decades, since the paper came out. And now a number of prisoners have said that they want to have their own campaign to vote for us. And they're doing it in the prisons. And we're going to put it in the paper so they can do that, along with those who are undocumented, those who are, felons who have been denied the right to vote. So that the most disenfranchised in society, we want to make sure that they have a voice with our election campaign. So anyway, that's a big part of our campaign. Ballot status, write-in campaigns in dozens of states, and online petitioning.
I would add to that too. I was recently listening to something, and they had the Republican Susan Collins, I think is her name, one of the senators, and she was saying how she cannot see herself supporting Trump. So people assumed she was going to go and vote for him.
Hillary.
And she said, no, I'm going to go to the ballot and write in who I think should be president. So I want people to understand. And she was on Meet the Press and Face the Nation when she said this. So y'all can see it, that writing in who you want to be president and putting a sticker. This is not something that's new or foreign, but the establishment, imperialism, does not want to see that happen. And as Mo mentioned earlier too, we are already thinking beyond the election, beyond November 8th. And so if y'all could put this on your calendar now, November 11th to the 13th, is our party conference in New York City. Because we know the work is going to be really starting. As they, they think it's going to be a big party. We're going to have Beyonce singing again and all this other kind of, people are coming to shut down the inaugural, and we're coming to put you on notice that we no longer going to be asking permission. We just going to put you on notice. So I think it's really empowering. I mean, I could even see like elementary school. My little one is an elementary school teacher. I could see her saying to her students in elementary school, y'all want to vote too?
Yeah. Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So there's so many different ways. At BLA, y'all might be like, we want to have our own mock election.
Yeah.
And we want to. These are all the candidates, because now y'all know there's some other candidates out there. And you have a school-wide vote. Who do y'all as high school students and middle school students want